As I'm getting ready for the Shadow of Kerensky DLC, I decided to take a look at other mech games that I may have skipped over. Looking at my ever-expanding GOG library, I decided to take a look at Battle Engine Aquila. This 2003 title was developed by Lost Toys, which I have never heard of before. Looking at the studio, they were made up of former developers of Bullfrog and only released 2 games before dissolving in 2003. Ball Breakers was their first title, while Battle Engine Aquila was their finale. Unfortunately, this was a common story for many studios during the early to mid 2000s due to ever shifting video game landscapes. With that said, is Battle Engine Aquila worth playing? Or is it not even worth the salvage? When you start the game, you can begin a new game and select the first mission. You play as a man named Hawkwinter, which is the perfect name for that early to mid 2000s edge. You're then recruited by the Forsetti to pilot the Aquila and fight against the evil Muspel faction. There's quite a few cutscenes to watch, but most are incredibly quick and don't really tell you much about the story. Like a lot of video games of this time, the story is just there to move the plot along. And after your introductory cutscene begins a tutorial. The default controls are split between player 1 and 2, so I recommend everyone to do some remapping of the keys. For me, I was feeling a bit frisky and actually managed to map this to my VKB Gladiator NXT Evo Space Combat joystick. I'm actually shocked that this game from 2003 had no issues, while Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries can't even detect it. Apparently Mechwarrior 5's clans works for the Gladiator, but I have yet to play that one. Either way, I actually did find using a joystick here to be very doable. After the tutorial mission begins the combat proper. Missions basically boil down to destroying enemy buildings and units alongside your allies. At first, you'll only have one weapon variation of the Aquila to use. By the end, you'll have up to 4 loadouts to choose from, all based on a different playstyle. Each loadout comes with 3 ground weapons and 2 airborne weapons. The variant I stuck with was the Pulsar one, mainly due to its insanely powerful micro missiles. I also like to use the pulse cannon due to its versatility. You can use it to shoot fast rounds or charge it for a more powerful variant. Enough fighting will also cause the weapon to be augmented, meaning it'll shoot a supercharged cannon. The weapons here are quite fun and varied to use. As I mentioned prior, the big selling point of Battle Engine Aquila is the ability to freely switch between being a landwalker and being an aircraft. Flying takes a bit to get used to, as you are not able to fly for an infinite amount of time. Instead, being in the skies uses your energy meter, which doubles up as a shield from attacks. The only way to recover energy is to be on the ground and hope to not get shot. Once it is recharged, you can switch back to flying mode and be back on your way. For aerial combat, it's quite good, especially with the micro missiles that I mentioned prior. It's pretty enjoyable performing a bombing run, then switching up to fight on the ground alongside allied troops. I just wish you could fly a little faster and didn't have such a drain to your energy when flying. One of my favorite features is the destructible buildings. Instead of you just shooting away at a building and hoping it eventually topples, you can actually play with the physics by destroying the bottom and watching it all collapse. It's actually quite fun shooting down enemy factories with grenades, seeing it getting destroyed piece by piece. The same logic also applies to battleships, where you can either destroy them outright or decide to take out the turrets instead. Now, all of this sounds great and does make for some very solid action, especially early on. Unfortunately, the longer you play, the worse the game gets. Early on, the difficulty is challenging, but not unfair. After just a few missions, the game has an insane difficulty spikes that'll require several restarts. Not only does the game throw everything at you at once, but certain events will require you to make split-second decisions in order to counter them. This is counterintuitive to the level designs, which often feature very open environments. It creates linearity when the missions are better off embracing their open nature. This is made worse by the boss fights you'll encounter. These have very specific areas that you'll need to hit, making this game feel dated with that weak spot mechanic. Some of these weak spots will be incredibly hard to hit unless you put yourself in the direct line of fire. Even worse is how some bosses will require you to replenish your ammo and health, and that can only usually be done at one exact spot on the map. The last boss in particular is incredibly frustrating, and really when the game just spikes to an insane degree. After you complete a mission, you're given a ranking on how well you did, as well as some extras for you to peruse through afterwards. Depending on the mission, may also unlock an alternative path if you've completed the optional objectives. As great as branching paths sound, it mainly just results in harder variations of the missions. It doesn't radically change the game or give you something interesting to pursue. It's not like Armored Core, where you get a different set of missions depending on your loyalties. Although one thing that does suck is that you'll need to go down a harder set of missions if you want the good ending and unlock the final mission. According to howlongtobeat.com, Battle Engine Aquila takes about 6 hours to complete. Most of your time will be spent restarting missions, especially in the latter half of the game. Considering the lack of real replay value from the single player perspective, you'll probably will not revisit this game anytime soon. Thankfully, there is more to do outside of the campaign. There is a local split screen where you can play co-op, a skirmish, or a straight up duel. Split screen on PC is often rare and is usually reserved for consoles. I'm glad it was included here in the PC version, although I once again recommend for you to remap your controls, as player 2 was given the control of the mouse for me and WASD for movement. I would recommend to plug in a controller and remap the controls there. Some people have complained about issues when using gamepads, but it ultimately depends on the controller you are using. I would recommend a Logitech G F310 for the ability to use X input and D input. And also, before we get to some of the closing thoughts, just wanted to talk about Windows 11 compatibility. Thankfully, I didn't have to adjust anything to get this game to work properly or have it run on my humble XP machine. It ran smoothly and loaded pretty much instantly. There isn't any native HD or 4K support though, so you'll need to play around a bit to get that widescreen resolution. Overall, Battle Engine Aquila is ultimately a novelty that has its movements, but I find difficult to recommend fully. For the positives, the concept of transforming between flying and fighting on ground is great, the weapons are quite strong, and the destruction is quite satisfying. Unfortunately, the game suffers from terrible difficulty spikes, overly tanky bosses, and a pretty lackluster narrative. It's no wonder why it is ultimately forgotten despite the cool concept. On GOG and Steam, the game goes for $10 full price, but is sometimes on sale for 50% off. At that price, it's definitely much less of a risk to take. Either way, hope you enjoyed this review and stay tuned to our return to Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries with Shadow of Kerensky. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.